Mason sat slouched on the porch swing, his guitar propped lazily against his knees, eyes unfocused as he stared at the soft pink streaks of the Nashville sunset. The world around him faded into a gentle hum, replaced by a vivid daydream in which Emily, radiant and laughing, slipped her hand into his as the band played softly in the background. In his mind, the crowd's applause didn't matter. Only her smile did. "I'll never let anything come between us," he whispered to himself, fingers absent-mindedly strumming a tune that hadn't yet found its melody. The air smelled faintly of honeysuckle, the way it did every late afternoon in their small suburban neighborhood, and Mason let it carry him further into his imaginary life. "Hey, Mason, wake up, you dork!" a voice rang out, breaking the spell. Mason jumped, almost toppling the guitar off his knees. He blinked, dazed, as Lily, his younger sister by 4 years, grinned at him with the kind of impish delight that made it impossible to stay mad. "Are you seriously sitting there staring at the sky again? Dreaming about your Emily, huh?" she teased, her hair bouncing as she leaned casually against the porch railing. Mason groaned and leaned back against the swing, giving her a mock glare. "I wasn't staring, I was, composing a song." He strummed a few random chords in an attempt to sound convincing. Lily raised an eyebrow, her grin widening. "Composing, please. You can't even remember your algebra formulas, let alone write a hit song," she said, laughing, nudging him with her elbow. He chuckled, shaking his head. "Not everything has to be about boring numbers and homework, Lily. Some of us live for music and dreams." His eyes softened as they lingered on the horizon, where the sky seemed to melt into shades of orange and lavender. Lily sat down beside him, her expression shifting to something gentler. "I know you love her, Mason, but sometimes it's not just about dreaming. You've got to actually, act," she said, her tone teasing yet concerned. Mason looked at her, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "And what's the fun in that if the journey isn't full of music, laughter, and, well, a little chaos?" He plucked a slow chord, watching Lily roll her eyes. "Chaos," she repeated, laughter dancing in her voice. "More like trouble, Mason. You're always in trouble." "I prefer adventurous," he countered with a wink. The siblings laughed together, the easy camaraderie between them filling the quiet street. Mason loved these moments with Lily, the way she could see right through him, calling him out without making him feel judged. Even in his most aimless hours, she somehow reminded him who he was, and more importantly, who he wanted to be. "Okay, daydreamer," Lily said, nudging him again. "Time to eat before Mom turns this porch into a courtroom." Mason groaned dramatically, pretending to struggle off the swing, his tousled hair falling into his eyes. "Fine, but only if there's chocolate pudding," he bargained, knowing full well it was his favorite. Lily shook her head, still laughing as she led the way into the house. Inside, Mason's daydreams faded for a moment, replaced by the comforting aroma of home-cooked food. But even as he ate, his thoughts kept drifting back to Emily. The way her laughter filled the room during practice, the way she played her guitar as if the music was an extension of her soul, and the way her eyes seemed to catch the sunlight perfectly. Mason's heart ached with longing, yet he couldn't admit it out loud, not to anyone. As he finished the last bite, Lily nudged him once more. "One day, Mason, one day you're going to have to stop dreaming and start doing. Otherwise, Emily's going to marry someone else who actually pays attention." Her words weren't harsh, they were full of sisterly concern, but they hit him harder than he expected. Mason swallowed, nodding slightly, though he wasn't ready to face that reality just yet. For now, he had his music, his dreams, and his ever-watchful sister, who always knew exactly when to wake him up, both literally and figuratively. Richard Hart's office smelled faintly of leather and old books, a combination that had always made Mason feel out of place. He sat in the corner chair, fingers tapping nervously against the polished mahogany desk as his father stared at him with a mix of exasperation and disappointment. "Mason, do you even hear me when I speak?" Richard asked, voice tight. His tie was loosened, sleeves rolled up, a rare sign that he was more than usually frustrated. Mason shrugged, leaning back in his chair, fingers kicking lightly. "I hear you, Dad. Really, I do," he said, trying to sound nonchalant. "But, music takes time." Richard groaned, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Music? Mason, you failed 3 college exams in a row. Music isn't going to pay the bills if you can't even pass a single class." His tone was sharp, but beneath the frustration was a deep-seated worry for his son. Mason's academic failures weren't just numbers. They represented what Richard feared was a lack of ambition, a life drifting without purpose. "Dad, come on," Mason said, leaning forward earnestly. "I'm trying. I'm in the band now, performing gigs, writing songs. That's real work, real effort." He tried to infuse confidence into his words, but the doubt in Richard's eyes was a wall he couldn't yet break. Richard groaned heavily, running a hand down his face. "I've tried to understand, Mason, I really have, but you need structure, discipline. Dreams are wonderful, but they won't put food on the table if they're not backed by responsibility." Mason's gaze fell to the floor, feeling the weight of his father's disappointment. For a moment, silence filled the room, heavy and uncomfortable. Then a familiar, calm voice interrupted, soft but commanding. "Richard, sometimes the boy just needs to follow his heart." Both men looked up to see Pastor James standing quietly in the doorway, a reassuring smile on his face. His presence seemed to ease the tension slightly. Mason relaxed, grateful for the familiar support. "Pastor James," Mason said, standing, "I didn't hear you come in." James stepped inside, hands clasped loosely in front of him. "I wanted to say, give him time. Mason has a good heart. It's not always about the path you think is best. Sometimes it's about the path he believes in." Richard's jaw tightened. "I know you mean well, James, but what if his heart leads him to failure?" James met his gaze steadily. "Then he learns. And sometimes the lessons we learn from chasing our passions are the ones that shape our character the most." He glanced at Mason, who felt a small spark of hope ignite within him. "I see a young man willing to work hard for what he loves. Isn't that worth something?" Mason nodded, feeling more determined. He met his father's eyes, trying to convey his sincerity. "Dad, I want to make this work. I know I've messed up in school, but I'm learning, I'm growing. Music, Emily, they're my motivation. I'm not just drifting." Richard studied him, expressions softening just a little. He could see the earnestness in Mason's eyes, though he still worried. "I want to believe that, Mason. I really do. But you need to show me, not just tell me. Actions, not words." Mason smiled, a small, confident grin that carried the warmth of determination. "I will, Dad, I promise." Pastor James placed a reassuring hand on Richard's shoulder. "Give him space, Richard. Let him prove himself. Sometimes the most important lessons aren't learned in a classroom." Richard exhaled slowly, letting the tension in his shoulders ease. Mason felt a flicker of hope, realizing that perhaps with time and a little patience, he could bridge the gap between his carefree leisure and his father's expectations. As Mason left the office, Lily's voice called from the hallway. "Don't forget, daydreamer, dinner's at 6. Mason grinned, waving back. Somehow, even amid disappointment and expectations, he felt the first stirrings of determination. For the first time in a long while, he thought that maybe, just maybe, he could chase his dreams and make his father proud. The streets of downtown Nashville buzzed with life, the air alive with the scent of barbecue, freshly brewed coffee, and the faint hum of distant guitars. Mason wheeled his battered guitar case down the sidewalk, dodging pedestrians and street performers. The city had a rhythm all its own, one that seemed to sync perfectly with the beat of his heart.
Music was more than a dream. It was the lifeblood that ran through him. Today, the band had a rehearsal at Caleb's apartment, and Mason could feel a flicker of excitement. Emily's absence over the past few weeks had left a void that was difficult to ignore. Her return was like a spark, igniting the group's collective energy. Mason remembered the day she walked through the studio door, her presence transforming the room instantly. "Hey everyone," she had said brightly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Her smile was like sunlight spilling over the instruments, lifting even the heaviest moods. Caleb, who had been quietly tuning his bass in the corner, looked up and nearly dropped the instrument. There was a softness in his gaze, subtle but unmistakable, that Mason couldn't help but notice. The band, Mason on lead guitar, Caleb on bass, Emily on rhythm guitar, and 3 others filling drums, keyboards, and vocals, had been rehearsing tirelessly for months. Their goal was simple: break into Nashville's music scene, to make a name for themselves in a city overflowing with talent. Mason thrived in this environment, where creativity and passion reigned over numbers and schedules. He strummed a few chords, the sound bouncing off the walls, and nodded at Emily. "Glad you're back," he said casually, though his heart raced slightly. Emily smiled warmly. "Missed you guys," she replied. Her presence had a rejuvenating effect on the group. Laughter echoed through the apartment as jokes were traded, chords were tested, and songs were tweaked. Yet beneath the cheerful surface, tension simmered. Mason noticed Caleb's lingering glances toward Emily, subtle, yet filled with unspoken emotion. It wasn't something Mason could ignore, though he tried, convincing himself that their friendship would remain intact. During a break, Caleb leaned against the keyboard, pretending to examine his phone. Mason, noticing him staring a little too long at Emily, smirked. "You've been practicing more than usual, huh?" he teased lightly. Caleb flushed, attempting to mask his feelings with humor. "What, me? No, I'm just, making sure the bass lines are perfect," he replied, his voice unconvincing. Emily, oblivious to the tension, laughed, picking up her guitar. "You two are ridiculous. Just play the music, okay?" As rehearsal continued, Mason found himself stealing glances at Emily, admiring the way her fingers danced across the strings, the way her eyes closed when she lost herself in the music. He felt a surge of inspiration, a desire to be better, not just as a musician, but as someone worthy of her attention. Music, he realized, wasn't just about passion, it was about connection. And he wanted that connection with Emily, more than anything. Later, as the evening settled in and the golden hues of sunset filtered through the windows, the band gathered their instruments and shared a quiet moment of reflection. "We're really doing this, huh?" Emily said softly, her eyes scanning the room. "We're chasing our dream." Mason nodded, a sense of purpose settling over him. "Yeah, and nothing's gonna stop us," he said, though his voice carried more than just bravado. It carried a genuine determination. Caleb's expression remained thoughtful, his secret feelings for Emily tucked neatly away behind a mask of composure. Mason had no idea how complicated things would become, but for now, in this small apartment in the heart of Nashville, the dream of music felt tangible, alive, and worth every struggle. As they packed up for the night, Mason lingered by the doorway, watching Emily carefully. There was something in the way she laughed with the others that made his heart ache and hope simultaneously. He knew he had to rise to the challenge, not just as a musician, but as someone who could stand beside her, deserving of her trust and admiration. The city hummed outside, a symphony of dreams, chaos, and opportunity, and Mason felt ready to step fully into it, knowing that each note he played brought him closer to the life he imagined.
Mason lay on his bed that night, staring at the ceiling as Emily's laughter from earlier in the day echoed in his mind. He thought of Caleb's quiet attentiveness, the way his rival's presence was undeniable, and felt a knot of determination twist in his chest. I can't let this slip away, he whispered to himself. Not Emily, not now, not ever. The next morning, Mason woke up earlier than usual, determination replacing his usual laziness. He pulled on a simple t-shirt, grabbed his notebook, and began jotting down ideas for new songs, focusing with a newfound seriousness he hadn't felt before. Every lyric, every chord, every beat was designed not just to impress the band, but to show Emily that he could change, grow, be someone who could match her brilliance. Lily, walking into his room with a steaming mug of coffee, raised an eyebrow. "Wow, Mason, you're actually awake before noon?" she teased, sliding the mug onto his desk. Yeah, laugh it up," Mason muttered, though a smile tugged at his lips. "I have work to do." Lily crossed her arms, skeptical. "Since when does work mean music and staring at a notebook?" "It means progress," Mason replied, eyes focused on the notes in front of him. "And for once, I'm going to show everyone, especially Emily, that I can be serious, that I can be someone worth noticing." He paused, tracing the chords with his fingers. "I'm tired of sitting on the sidelines while life passes me by." That afternoon, Mason went for a run around the streets near the studio, guitar slung across his back, earbuds pumping his own music into his ears. Each step, each strum, each breath felt like a declaration. He was no longer just the carefree guy who avoided responsibility. He was committed to his craft, to his dreams, and most importantly, to proving that he could be someone Emily would trust and admire. At rehearsal that evening, Mason's dedication was immediately apparent. He arrived early, meticulously tuning his guitar, reviewing his notes, and rehearsing riffs he had been hesitant to try before. Emily noticed the change immediately. You've been working," she observed casually, though her eyes betrayed surprise and curiosity. Mason shrugged, trying to play it cool. "Yeah, figured it was time to step it up. Can't let you outshine me completely, can I?" Caleb, observing from across the room, felt a twinge of irritation mixed with admiration. Mason was no longer the same boy who was aimless and carefree. He was deliberate, focused, and unexpectedly compelling. While Caleb had long assumed he had the quiet advantage with Emily, Mason's newfound seriousness made the competition real. Throughout the practice session, Mason's energy was infectious. The band responded to his intensity, melodies flowed smoother, and rhythms clicked in ways they hadn't before. Emily's fingers danced across her guitar strings, a spark of excitement in her eyes. This feels good," she said, her voice soft but sincere. Mason grinned, feeling a sense of pride that had nothing to do with recognition and everything to do with personal growth. Later, as they took a break, Mason caught Emily alone near the window, light from the fading sun highlighting her features. "Hey," he said quietly, leaning against the wall. "Thanks for, inspiring me to take this seriously. I needed it." Emily looked at him, her expression gentle but measured. "You've always had potential, Mason. It's just nice to see you finally realizing it." Mason felt a surge of hope, mixed with apprehension. This was just the beginning. His path to winning Emily's heart or even earning her respect would be long and uncertain. But, for the first time, he believed he was capable. "I won't let you or myself down," he promised, more to himself than to her. That night, Mason sat on the rooftop of his apartment building, guitar resting on his lap, city lights twinkling below like stars scattered across the earth. He played a soft melody, the notes carrying both longing and determination. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed, blending with the rhythm of Nashville's heartbeat. Mason knew that change was possible, that his dreams were worth fighting for, and that perhaps, just perhaps, love could be part of that journey. For the first time in a long time, Mason didn't just dream, he acted. And that spark of change, small and fragile as it was, began to illuminate a path forward, one strum, one step, and one choice at a time.
The evening air in downtown Nashville buzzed with excitement as fairy lights twinkled overhead, casting a warm glow across the courtyard where the wedding reception was set. Mason adjusted his guitar strap nervously, his eyes scanning the crowd for Emily, who had arrived with Caleb. Her laughter carried across the venue, sparkling above the soft chatter and clinking glasses, and Mason felt a pang in his chest. He tried to focus on the performance ahead, running through the first few chords in his mind. The band had been hired for the event, a friend's wedding, and this was their chance to show Nashville that they belonged in the city's thriving music scene. Yet Mason's attention drifted repeatedly to Emily. The way she leaned toward Caleb, whispering something that made him laugh softly, was a sight Mason couldn't ignore. His fingers tightened on the guitar strings, a subtle tremor betraying his growing unease. Caleb's closeness to Emily was undeniable. Every small touch, every shared glance, seemed to Mason like a silent declaration of their bond. He forced himself to strum a chord, trying to drown out the jealousy knotting in his stomach, but each note felt heavier than the last. "Focus, Mason," he muttered under his breath. "Play for the music, not for her." The ceremony transitioned seamlessly into the reception, and the band began their set. Mason's voice rang clear as he sang, but his heart wasn't in the performance. Instead, he watched Emily across the room, laughing at something Caleb had said. The casual intimacy between them stung like a physical blow. He realized, with a bitter twist in his chest, that Emily's attention had shifted away from him. During a break between songs, Mason leaned against the piano, pretending to adjust his guitar. He watched Caleb help Emily with her dress, the soft brush of his hand over her back enough to ignite Mason's jealousy. "What are you doing?" he asked under his breath to himself, a frustrated whisper. "Why can't I just, be the one she looks at?" By the time the couple cut the cake, Mason's heart had settled on a dangerous plan. He could not stand to see them so connected. If he could subtly sow doubt between them, he thought, maybe Emily would notice him again. Perhaps she would remember that he cared for her more than Caleb ever could. The thought, as dark as it was, filled him with a mix of determination and guilt. As the night unfolded, Mason attempted subtle manipulations, interrupting conversations between Emily and Caleb, making offhand remarks meant to spark jealousy or suspicion. "Careful, Caleb," he said casually during a song break. "Wouldn't want Emily to think you too clingy." Caleb blinked at him, frowning, while Emily looked confused. "Mason, what are you talking about?" she asked, her voice gentle but wary. Mason shrugged, forcing a nonchalant smile. "Just joking," he replied, though the tension in his chest refused to ease. Despite his efforts, Mason could feel the growing distance between his intentions and reality. Emily's laughter remained sincere, and Caleb's eyes continued to hold only admiration and care for her. Still, Mason's heart burned with a mixture of longing and heartbreak. He told himself that he was acting out of love, but deep down, he sensed that his actions were crossing a line he wasn't sure he could come back from. By the end of the night, the music wound down and guests began to leave. Mason's hands trembled slightly as he packed up his guitar, the echoes of Emily's laughter still ringing in his ears. His plan, he realized, was not working the way he had envisioned. Instead of drawing Emily closer, he felt a growing chasm between them, one that threatened not only his chance with her, but also the trust and camaraderie of the band. As he slung the guitar over his shoulder and stepped into the cool night air, his chest tightened. His heartbeat echoed the rhythm of disappointment and desire. Nashville's streets, alive with the glow of street lamps and the distant strum of other musicians, seemed to mock him with the freedom of others' joy. He had wanted to win Emily's heart, but instead, he had only made his own longing more visible and more dangerous.
The next morning, Mason woke with a knot of dread twisting in his stomach.
His schemes from the previous night, which had seemed clever and necessary in his mind, now felt reckless and misguided. He tried to convince himself it had all been innocent, harmless nudges, but deep down he knew the truth. Emily had seen the undercurrent of manipulation, and Mason feared the consequences. He arrived at the band's rehearsal space early, hoping to clear the air before anyone else arrived. The moment he stepped inside, tension hung in the room like a thick fog. Emily sat on the couch, arms crossed, her expression unreadable yet sharp. Caleb tuned his bass silently, avoiding Mason's gaze. Mason swallowed hard, realizing that this was far more serious than he had anticipated. "Morning," Mason said, his voice cautious. Emily didn't respond immediately, her eyes narrowing slightly. Finally she spoke, her voice calm but firm. "Mason, we need to talk." The weight of those words pressed down on him, heavier than any chord he had ever played. Mason nodded, moving closer. "I know last night things got a little messy. You were manipulative," Emily interrupted, her tone cutting through the air like a blade. "I don't know what you thought you were doing, but it was unfair, Mason. To me, to Caleb, to the whole band." Her eyes, normally warm and forgiving, were now filled with hurt and anger. Mason opened his mouth to protest, but no words came. He had hoped to justify his actions, to explain that it had all been out of love, but her gaze left him speechless. Emily stood, taking a step closer. "I trusted you, Mason. I really did. And you betrayed that trust." Caleb, finally speaking, added, quietly, "It wasn't just about Emily. We're a team. Your actions affected everyone tonight. You can't just manipulate people's feelings and expect it to slide." Mason's stomach churned. He had wanted Emily's attention, but he had not considered the broader consequences. Emily's hand flew up, connecting sharply with Mason's cheek, in a slap that echoed through the room. "I never want to speak to you again," she said, voice trembling with emotion. Mason rubbed his face, shock and regret flooding him. The sound of the door closing behind her punctuated the finality of her words. The band's silence was suffocating. Mason, usually the source of humor and energy, now felt the weight of isolation pressing down on him. His attempts to win Emily's heart had backfired completely, leaving him not only heartbroken, but also ostracized. He had been a careless player in a game he hadn't fully understood. Tony and Vance, two band friends who had been casual observers of Mason's antics, shook their heads sympathetically. "Man, you really dug yourself a hole this time," Tony muttered. Mason gave a bitter laugh, realizing that even his allies were hesitant to intervene. Over the next few days, Mason stayed away from the band, grappling with the consequences of his actions. His guitar sat untouched, collecting dust in the corner of his room. The melodies that had once flowed so effortlessly now seemed distant, drowned out by guilt and heartbreak. Mason replayed the wedding performance over and over in his mind, each interaction with Emily and Caleb amplified. Each remark and subtle attempt at manipulation replayed like a broken record. He tried to call Emily, to apologize, but each attempt ended with voicemail, her refusal to answer a constant reminder of his failure. Caleb avoided him as well, polite but distant, leaving him to confront the stark reality of his mistakes alone. The band had given him a second chance before, but this felt different. The breach of trust was deeper, more personal, and Mason knew that it would take more than just music to repair it. One evening, Mason found himself walking alone through the quiet streets of Nashville. The city's lights glimmered, the distant sound of a guitar strumming in another corner of town, a reminder of what he had once loved. He stopped near a street lamp, staring at his reflection in the darkened window of a nearby shop. For the first time, he realized that his heart, his dreams, and his friendships were intertwined in ways he hadn't respected. "I messed up," he whispered to himself, voice barely audible over the night breeze. "I really messed up." Yet beneath the despair, a tiny spark of determination remained. Mason knew that redemption would be hard, that forgiveness would be earned and not given, and that his path back to the band and to Emily would require patience, humility, and change. For now, Mason was alone, facing the consequences of his actions. But as he walked beneath the glow of Nashville streetlights, guitar case in hand, he vowed silently that he would find a way to make things right, even if it took everything he had to do so.
The neon lights of the downtown Nashville club flickered erratically, casting uneven shadows across the worn wooden stage. Mason tightened the strap on his guitar, glancing nervously at the crowd that had begun to grow restless. The band's set was already off to a rocky start. Hecklers at the edge of the dance floor shouted over the music, throwing drinks and laughing cruelly at the performers. Emily and Caleb exchanged frustrated glances, their hands flying over their instruments in a desperate attempt to maintain the rhythm. "Someone do something!" shouted the drummer, slamming a cymbal in exasperation. The keyboardist muttered under her breath, "This is a disaster." Mason could see the fear in the eyes of the band, a rare crack in their collective confidence. But beneath the tension, something in him ignited, a mixture of anger, determination, and the need to prove himself worthy again. He stepped forward, positioning himself in the center of the stage. "Hey!" Mason's voice rang clear over the chaos. "Listen up! This isn't how tonight ends." The hecklers paused, momentarily startled by the assertiveness in his tone. Mason took a deep breath and strummed the first chord of a fast, electric riff that had been simmering in his mind for weeks. The sound pierced through the din, sharp and precise, cutting through the chaos like a blade. Emily's eyes widened, a mixture of surprise and admiration crossing her face. "Mason, that's incredible," she whispered almost to herself as she matched his rhythm on her guitar. Caleb's hands trembled slightly as he fell into the groove, the bass lines harmonizing perfectly with Mason's riff. The rest of the band quickly regained their composure as Mason's lead as the music swelled and filled every corner of the club. The crowd, initially hostile, began to sway, caught by the electrifying energy that Mason channeled into every note. Cheers replaced jeers as Mason stepped forward, voice rising over the music. "This is for everyone who believes in music, in dreams, and in second chances." His fingers danced over the strings with precision, passion radiating from every movement. For the first time in weeks, Mason felt fully alive, fully connected, not just to the music, but to the people around him. As the set progressed, Mason moved through the crowd, interacting with the audience, drawing them into the rhythm, making every individual feel part of the experience. Emily and Caleb exchanged glances, their previous tension momentarily replaced with awe. "I didn't think he had it in him," Emily murmured, her voice tinged with both surprise and admiration. Caleb nodded, equally impressed, realizing that Mason's performance had not only saved the show, but also reminded everyone why he had been a vital part of the band in the first place. By the final song, the entire club was cheering, dancing, and singing along. Mason's heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing the exhilaration of redemption. As he struck the last chord, silence hung for a brief, electrifying moment before the crowd erupted into applause. Emily ran to him, eyes shining with excitement. "Mason, that was amazing!" she exclaimed, throwing her arms around him briefly before stepping back. Caleb approached, his expression a mixture of respect and acknowledgement. "You really pulled us through," he said, clapping Mason on the shoulder. Mason smiled, feeling a sense of relief and accomplishment that words couldn't fully capture. For the first time since the wedding debacle, he felt the warmth of forgiveness, the comfort of belonging, and the knowledge that he could still make a difference. After the show, the band gathered backstage, their energy electric and unified. "Welcome back," Emily said, her tone both playful and sincere. Mason grinned, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. "Thanks. I won't let you down again." The members nodded in agreement, the tension of the past weeks dissolving into camaraderie. Mason realized that redemption wasn't just about regaining trust. It was about proving to himself that he could rise above mistakes, that he could channel his heart into something greater than selfish desire. As the night ended and the club emptied, Mason lingered by the stage, watching the city lights twinkle through the windows. He felt lighter, stronger, and more determined than ever. The journey towards Emily, towards success, and towards his own growth was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, he felt he was moving in the right direction. One chord, one performance, and one choice at a time.
The morning sunlight streamed through Mason's bedroom window, cutting through the lingering haze of exhaustion from the previous night's performance. Mason rubbed his eyes and opened a letter sitting on his desk, a stark reminder that not all battles were won on stage. The envelope contained the results of his latest college exams, and as he unfolded the paper, his stomach sank. Once again, he had failed, for the third time. The knock on his door was firm and deliberate. "Mason, we need to talk," Richard said, voice heavy with disappointment. Mason stood, crumpling the exam results in his hand, and followed his father into the living room. The tension was palpable, the air thick with unspoken frustration and worry. Richard sank into the armchair, his hands clasped tightly together. "3 failures, Mason, 3. How many chances do you expect me to give you before you realize this path isn't working?" Mason ran a hand through his hair, trying to remain calm. "Dad, I know it looks bad. I messed up, okay? But I'm working on music. I'm trying to make something of myself." His words sounded less convincing to himself than to Richard, whose frown deepened. Richard shook his head slowly. "Music, dreams, daydreams, those don't pay the bills. They don't build a future. I've tried to support you, Mason, but you keep choosing failure. I can't keep watching you throw your life away." His voice cracked slightly, a mixture of frustration and genuine fear for his son. Pastor James, who had been invited over to mediate, stepped forward gently. "Richard, Mason is passionate, yes, but passion doesn't always follow conventional paths. He's dedicated in ways that aren't reflected in grades or transcripts." Mason felt a spark of hope at the pastor's words, but he knew his father's approval wouldn't come easily. Mason's friend Tony, who had come along for moral support, nodded. "Your dad's right about the grades, Mason, but he needs to see that your music isn't just a hobby. You're serious about this." Mason exhaled slowly, realizing the truth in both perspectives. His father's worry wasn't about control, it was about care, about wanting a stable life for his son. Richard's eyes softened, though the tension in his shoulders remained. "I want to understand, Mason, I really do, but you have to show me that this music can be more than just fun. You have to show me that it's a path, not a detour." Mason met his father's gaze, determination flickering in his eyes. "I will, Dad, I promise. I'll prove it to you. You'll see." Over the next few weeks, Mason immersed himself in music with renewed focus. He composed new songs, rehearsed tirelessly, and sought out every opportunity to perform. His dedication was tangible, and slowly, Richard began to notice. The change wasn't instant, but the father who had once doubted him started attending small performances, listening carefully to the lyrics and watching Mason's growth as a performer. Pastor James often checked in, offering guidance and encouragement. "Mason, remember, it's not just about talent. It's about persistence, integrity, and showing those who doubt you that your heart is in the right place." Mason nodded, absorbing every word. He knew that earning his father's trust and respect would take time, patience, and consistent effort. One Saturday, Richard came to watch the band at a local open mic night. Mason's hands shook slightly as he stepped onto the stage, but the moment his fingers touched the guitar strings, a calm focus settled over him. The music flowed effortlessly, each note carrying emotion, dedication, and a desire to prove himself. By the time the final chord reverberated through the room, Mason saw Richard's expression change, his eyes glistening with pride, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. After the performance, Richard approached Mason, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I see it now," he said quietly. "I see your dedication. I see that you're serious, Mason, and I'm proud of you." Mason's heart swelled, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and renewed determination. He knew the road ahead was still full of challenges, but for the first time he felt his father's unwavering support, grounded not in grades or conventional success, but in the recognition of his son's passion, heart, and relentless pursuit of music. That night, Mason sat on his porch, guitar resting across his knees, the city lights of Nashville twinkling in the distance. He thought of Emily, of Caleb, and the journey that had led him here, from heartbreak and mistakes to redemption and understanding. The path was far from complete, but Mason now carried something more powerful than talent: purpose, conviction, and the quiet confidence that he was finally on the right track.
The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Mason's apartment, casting streaks of gold across his cluttered floor. He sat on the edge of his bed, guitar resting across his knees, staring blankly at the wall. Thoughts of Emily and Caleb haunted him, replaying every moment from the wedding performance to the small gestures of affection that had made his chest ache. Mason had convinced himself, foolishly, that he might still have a chance, that somehow Emily would notice the depth of his feelings and choose him. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling heavily. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I became the person she deserved, she'd see me differently, he murmured. The truth was hard to swallow. Emily's heart belonged to Caleb. It wasn't a matter of manipulation, timing, or ambition. She loved him. Mason had spent weeks crafting a plan, hoping to win her attention, only to realize that love cannot be forced or engineered. Later that afternoon, Mason walked to the band's rehearsal space, where Emily and Caleb were quietly discussing their wedding plans. The air between them was light, filled with laughter and shared understanding. Mason's footsteps slowed as he approached the door, listening to their conversation from the threshold. "I can't wait to start this next chapter with you," Emily said, softly, her voice tinged with excitement and warmth. Caleb smiled, taking her hand. "Neither can I. We've waited for this a long time." Mason felt a pang of sorrow tighten in his chest, a mix of heartbreak and acceptance. He had long fantasized about moments like this with Emily, yet the reality of their love was different from his dreams. Slowly, he stepped inside, offering a neutral smile. "You two look happy," he said, his voice steady despite the storm inside. Emily turned, noticing the faint sadness in his eyes. "Mason," she said, gently, "are you okay?" Mason nodded, forcing a small laugh. "Yeah, I just needed to hear it one last time, I guess, to see that you're really happy." Caleb's eyes flicked toward him, guarded but understanding, sensing the conflict that Mason was trying to conceal. Over the next hour, Mason joined the rehearsal, contributing to the music as he always had, but with a quiet dignity. He played each note with precision, channeling his feelings into the strings, letting the melodies express what he could not put into words. The music carried the weight of his heartbreak, the longing and the acceptance of a love that was never meant to be his. During a break, Emily approached him, her expression soft but serious. "Mason, I know you've been struggling with all of this. I want you to know that I value your friendship more than you realize, but my heart, it's with Caleb. You need to accept that for your own sake." Mason nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I know," I replied quietly. "I've known for a while, actually. I guess I hoped one day things might be different." Emily placed a hand on his shoulder, offering reassurance. "You'll find someone who truly belongs with you, Mason. Someone who sees all the incredible things about you that I can't give you." Mason smiled faintly, appreciating her honesty. It was painful, yes, but it was also a reminder that real love involves selflessness. For the first time, he understood that sometimes love is about letting go, not holding on. That evening, Mason sat on the rooftop of his apartment building. The city of Nashville sprawled beneath him like a sea of lights. The music from distant clubs drifted through the air, a reminder of his dreams, his passions, and the life he still had ahead. He strummed a quiet melody on his guitar, one that carried both sorrow and hope. Each note a step toward healing. Mason thought of Emily and Caleb, of their laughter and shared moments, and he felt no bitterness, only a deep, aching respect for the love they had. He knew that he had to move forward, to focus on his own journey, and to allow himself the chance to find happiness elsewhere. Heartbreak, he realized, was not the end of the story. It was a chapter, painful but necessary, that would shape who he was to become. By the time the moon rose over Nashville, Mason felt a sense of calm settle over him. He had faced lost love, and though it stung deeply, he had also grown. He had proven to himself that he could endure, that he could act with maturity and selflessness, and that he could channel his emotions into music and purpose. Tomorrow he would continue the journey, but tonight he simply allowed himself to breathe, to mourn, and to begin healing.
The news came like a thunderclap during a quiet afternoon in Emily's home. Caleb's parents had arranged his marriage to the daughter of a family friend in Memphis, a decision rooted in tradition, social expectations, and familial duty. The weight of it settled over the room like a thick fog, suffocating yet undeniable. Emily's father, who had supported Caleb and Emily's relationship, looked conflicted, torn between respect for tradition and the happiness of his daughter. Emily's heart sank. She had hoped that nothing could come between them now, that their love would finally be free from obstacles. And yet, cultural pressures and family obligations loomed over them, casting a shadow on their future. How can this be happening? Emily whispered, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the table. Caleb, sitting beside her, clenched his jaw, a storm of frustration and despair in his eyes. My parents, they've already made the arrangements, Caleb said quietly, his voice tight with tension. It's not just a suggestion. They expect me to comply. They don't understand. They don't see how much you mean to me, Emily. Emily placed a hand over his, squeezing it tightly. I know, Caleb, I know, but we'll find a way, somehow. Caleb shook his head, a mixture of guilt and helplessness shadowing his features. I don't know if there is a way. They've involved families, lawyers, everything is set in motion. It's like there's no escape from what they've decided. Emily's eyes filled with tears as she realized the enormity of the situation. It wasn't just about love anymore. It was about family expectations, obligations, and the weight of tradition that neither of them could ignore. Emily's father, trying to mediate, spoke carefully. We've always respected Caleb's parents, and this marriage arrangement, it's a matter of honor and family ties. I know it complicates everything, but we must also consider the broader picture. His words, though diplomatic, cut through the fragile hope Emily had held on to. Mason, who had been nearby helping with band logistics, overheard the conversation. He felt a pang of sorrow, both for Caleb and Emily, and for himself, reminded of his own heartbreak. Yet he also understood the stakes, the difficult position both families were in, and the way that love and duty often collided in harsh, uncompromising ways. The room fell silent as the reality of the situation sank in. Emily's mother dabbed at her eyes, unable to hide her worry. Caleb's expression hardened, a mixture of determination and despair crossing his features. Emily, he said finally, voice low but resolute, no matter what happens, I love you, and I'll find a way to make this right. Somehow. Emily nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. I love you too, Caleb. We'll face this together. Even in the midst of despair, there was a sense of resilience, a quiet defiance against the pressures surrounding them. The challenge was formidable,
But love, they realized, was not passive. It required courage, sacrifice, and sometimes navigating impossible circumstances. As they clung to each other, the tension between love and duty became the defining struggle of their lives, a test that would shape the choices they made and the paths they walked. That evening, Caleb stood on the balcony outside Emily's house, gazing at the fading Memphis skyline in the distance. He knew that the coming days would test every ounce of his resolve, and that the decisions made by his parents could alter their future irrevocably. Yet he also knew that love was worth fighting for, even when faced with seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Emily joined him, her hand slipping into his. "We'll figure this out," she said softly, resting her head on his shoulder. Caleb nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also the strength of their bond. In that quiet moment, amidst cultural pressures and family obligations, they found solace in each other's presence. It wasn't a solution, it was a promise, a vow to fight for love even when the world seemed determined to intervene. Mason watched them from the doorway, heart aching, yet quietly proud. He knew the path forward would be difficult, filled with complications and heartbreak, but the love between Emily and Caleb was undeniable. And for him, that was enough. He stepped back, letting them face their challenges together, understanding that some stories of love were not his to claim, but his to respect.
The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the curtains of Emily's living room, casting a warm golden glow over the space. Emily sat slumped on the couch, her hands clasped together tightly, her gaze fixed on the floor. The weight of recent events, Caleb's arranged marriage, the expectations of his parents, and the uncertainty of their future weighed heavily on her. Mason, standing by the doorway, felt a pang of empathy. He had loved her deeply, yet now he was faced with the painful task of simply being there for her as a friend, a supporter, and a confidant. "Emily," Mason said softly, stepping into the room, careful not to startle her. I thought you might need someone to talk to. I know things have been hard." Emily looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. For a brief moment, her gaze softened, recognizing the sincerity in Mason's expression. "Mason, it's just... everything feels like it's falling apart," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Mason sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "I know it feels overwhelming," he said gently, "but you're stronger than you realize. You've faced challenges before, and you've always found a way through." Emily managed a small, weary smile, appreciating his presence. Unlike Caleb's protective energy or her father's concerned vigilance, Mason's support carried no pressure or expectation, just understanding. As the afternoon turned into evening, Mason listened as Emily poured out her fears and frustrations. She spoke of her longing for a future with Caleb, her worry about family expectations, and her sense of helplessness in the face of tradition. Mason offered words of comfort, never interrupting, never trying to redirect her feelings. His kindness, patience, and empathy became a balm for her frayed nerves, and slowly, Emily began to feel a sense of calm she hadn't experienced in days. At one point, Emily's father entered the room, having returned home from a day of meetings with Caleb's family. He observed the scene silently, noting Mason's demeanor, the quiet attentiveness, the respectful manner, the genuine care. "Mason," he said finally, voice measured, "I see how you're helping Emily. You handle these moments with maturity and compassion. That says a lot about you." Mason's cheeks flushed slightly, but he maintained his composure. "Thank you, sir," he replied respectfully. I want to support her in any way I can. That's all." The hours passed, and Emily's father continued to watch Mason interact with his daughter. He saw a young man who, despite past mistakes and heartache, possessed integrity, selflessness, and a genuine desire to do what was right. Mason's support was not driven by selfish desire or ambition. It was rooted in respect for Emily's feelings and for the bond she shared with Caleb. Slowly, the father's initial skepticism began to soften. Over dinner that evening, the atmosphere in the house shifted subtly. Mason helped Emily with small tasks, offering quiet encouragement and practical advice, never overstepping boundaries. Emily's father joined them, engaging in conversation with Mason about music, goals, and values. He found himself impressed by Mason's thoughtfulness, his ability to remain calm under pressure, and his willingness to prioritize Emily's happiness above his own desires. Later that night, Emily lingered in the living room, Mason standing near the doorway. "Thank you, Mason," she said softly, for everything. For just being here without expecting anything in return." Mason smiled gently, the familiar ache in his chest present, but tempered by the satisfaction of helping her. "You don't need to thank me, Emily. Seeing you calm, seeing you smile, that's enough." As Mason left her house that night, he glanced back, noting Emily's father observing him from the doorway. There was a quiet acknowledgement in his gaze, a recognition of Mason's character and the depth of his integrity. Mason walked into the cool Nashville night, feeling a mixture of longing, pride, and quiet satisfaction. He had done nothing more than offer compassion, yet in doing so, he had earned trust, respect, and a measure of moral high ground, a position he never sought, but one he had naturally claimed through kindness. For Mason, the night ended with a sense of purpose renewed. He had learned that true strength lies not in manipulation, ambition, or desire, but in selflessness, empathy, and the courage to stand by those we care for, even when it hurts us personally.
The path forward was still uncertain, but Mason knew that no matter what happened, he had acted honorably, and that knowledge would sustain him in the days to come.
The following week, Mason found himself walking through the quiet streets of Nashville, guitar case in hand, reflecting on the lessons of the past few months. Emily's happiness had become his priority, even above his own desires, and he had discovered the strength to put her needs before his heart. Yet, an unexpected conversation with Emily's father the evening before had stirred conflicting emotions. "You've shown remarkable patience and integrity, Mason," Emily's father had said, his tone serious. "I see that you could provide Emily with stability, love, and a life built on respect. I wouldn't hesitate to support a future between you two, if she were willing." Mason's chest had swelled with hope briefly, the possibility of a future with Emily flickering in his mind. But then he thought of Caleb, of their love, and the knowledge of his heart's true desires. Mason stopped outside a cafe, watching the city lights reflect on the wet pavement. He had a choice: follow his father's advice and pursue a life with Emily, one that offered him comfort and recognition, or step aside for the sake of true love, letting Emily and Caleb be together without interference. The answer, though painful, was clear. Mason inhaled deeply, steadying himself. True love, he realized, is not selfish, it sacrifices. The next day, he approached Emily and Caleb, who were sitting in a small rehearsal studio, reviewing wedding plans. "Hey," Mason said softly, keeping his tone neutral. Both looked up, Emily's expression curious, Caleb's cautious. "I wanted to talk to you both." Caleb frowned slightly. "What's on your mind, Mason?" he asked, sensing the gravity in his friend's voice. Mason took a deep breath. "I know there's been a lot of tension, confusion, and maybe some hurt in the past. I've realized something very important over these last few weeks. Emily, your heart belongs to him, and no one, no matter how much they care, should stand in the way of that. Emily's eyes widened slightly, tears welling, while Caleb stared in disbelief. Mason, are you saying what I think you're saying? Emily asked, her voice trembling. Mason nodded. I'm saying that I want you two to be together. Truly, fully, without hesitation. I can't get in the way. You both deserve this happiness. Caleb's jaw tightened, his emotions raw. Mason, you don't have to do this. You could fight for her. Mason shook his head. No, I've fought for something I knew wasn't mine to take. Love isn't about winning. It's about doing what's right. And right now, that means letting you two be together. Emily reached out, grasping Mason's hand. I don't know how to thank you. Your selflessness, it's more than I could ever expect. You've shown me what true friendship and true love really are. Mason smiled faintly, a mix of sorrow and fulfillment in his eyes. Just promise me one thing, he said gently. Promise me that you'll be happy. That's all I could ever ask. In the days that followed, Mason worked behind the scenes, ensuring that Emily and Caleb's wedding plans proceeded smoothly. He coordinated with vendors, handled logistics, and provided quiet moral support, never inserting himself into the couple's decisions. Each act of assistance carried a bittersweet weight, but Mason bore it willingly, recognizing that love often requires sacrifice more profound than any personal desire. On the morning of the wedding, Mason arrived early at the venue, helping with decorations and last-minute arrangements. As the ceremony began, he stood at the back of the hall, observing Caleb and Emily exchange vows with a mixture of joy, reverence, and a subtle ache in his chest. When Caleb placed the ring on Emily's finger, it slipped momentarily and rolled out of sight. Mason spotted it, but did nothing, choosing instead to let the moment remain theirs. Lily, who had accompanied him, shot him a glance of understanding, silent acknowledgement of his sacrifice. After the ceremony, Mason walked outside into the Nashville evening, the city lights glimmering around him. His heart ached, yes, but there was also a profound sense of peace. He had acted with integrity, protecting the love of two people who deserved to be together. The moral victory, though unspoken, was his alone, and it carried a weight far deeper than any romantic triumph ever could. As he wandered the quiet streets, Mason caught sight of a young woman looking lost, asking for directions. He smiled gently, pointing her the way, and a conversation began, light, easy, and filled with laughter. For the first time in weeks, Mason felt a spark of possibility for a new beginning, a life unburdened by unrequited love, but rich with the promise of connection, friendship, and perhaps someday, romance. Mason paused for a moment, glancing back towards the venue where Emily and Caleb celebrated their union. A soft breeze carried the sounds of music and laughter, reminders of the love he had nurtured from a distance. He exhaled, a weight lifting from his chest. The pain of sacrifice was real, but so too had been the reward. The quiet, undeniable knowledge that he had acted honorably, with selflessness, integrity, and a heart capable of great love.
The morning sun in Nashville shone brightly, illuminating the white drapery and floral arrangements of the outdoor wedding venue. Guests began filing in, their chatter and laughter filling the air, mingling with the soft strumming of a string quartet tuning for the ceremony. Mason arrived early, his hands tucked into his pockets, trying to steady the flurry of emotions inside him. He had spent weeks preparing to be present, supportive and selfless, and now the culmination of Emily and Caleb's love was unfolding right before him. Lily, his younger sister, nudged him gently as they entered the reception area. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, a mischievous smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Mason glanced down at her, smiling faintly. "As ready as I'll ever be," he replied quietly. There was a shared understanding between them. Lily knew the sacrifices Mason had made, and she silently admired his capacity for selflessness. The ceremony began, and Mason took a position at the back, observing the couple as they approached the altar. Caleb held Emily's hand, his expression a mixture of joy and nerves, while Emily's eyes glimmered with tears of happiness. Mason's chest tightened, a pang of longing and heartbreak settling deep within him. Yet he reminded himself that this moment was not about him. It was about their love, their happiness, and the vows they were about to exchange. As the officiant began the ceremony, Caleb reached for the wedding ring, but in a sudden, almost comical twist, it slipped from his fingers and rolled across the polished wooden floor. Gasps rippled through the guests, and Emily's eyes widened in surprise. Mason noticed the ring glinting under the sunlight as it came to rest near his feet. For a heartbeat, he considered picking it up, making the moment seamless for the couple. Instead, he did nothing. He let the ring remain out of sight, pretending he had not noticed it. Lily, standing quietly beside him, shot him a knowing glance. A silent gesture of understanding, of shared empathy, and of acknowledgement for the moral choice he had made. Mason felt a profound warmth at the gesture, recognizing the strength in his own restraint. He knew that the magic of the moment belonged entirely to Emily and Caleb, and he would not let his presence overshadow it. Guests chuckled softly as Caleb, flustered but composed, retrieved the ring with a subtle bow and returned it to Emily's finger. The ceremony continued without further incident, the couple exchanging vows that reflected the depth of their love, their shared history, and the promise of a lifetime together. Mason watched, heart heavy yet serene, appreciating the beauty of genuine love unfolding before his eyes. During the readings, Emily's voice trembled with emotion as she recited her vows. Caleb's response was steady, filled with sincerity and commitment. Mason noticed the subtle touches, the fleeting glances, and the shared laughter between them. And he felt a sense of peace, despite the ache in his heart. The day, which could have been overshadowed by his own desires, instead became a testament to his growth, patience, and understanding. As the ceremony concluded, the couple shared their first kiss as husband and wife, prompting applause and cheers from the gathered guests. Mason's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and he allowed himself a small smile. This was the culmination of love, not his, but theirs, and he could appreciate its perfection without feeling diminished. Lily wrapped an arm around his waist, squeezing him gently. "You did good, Mason," she whispered, and he nodded, grateful for her support. The rest of the day passed in a blur of celebration, dancing, toasts, and laughter. Mason remained quietly in the background, helping when needed, ensuring that the couple's joy was uninterrupted. Guests complimented him on his composure, his kindness, and his generosity of spirit, though none could fully grasp the depth of his internal struggle. Yet Mason felt a profound sense of fulfillment. He had chosen love over selfish desire, empathy over resentment, and in doing so had achieved a moral victory that no applause could match. As the sun set over Nashville, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Mason stepped outside for a breath of air. The sounds of laughter and music drifted behind him, mingling with the gentle evening breeze. He thought of Emily and Caleb, their shared life now beginning, and felt a quiet gratitude for having witnessed and supported it. He had learned that love is not possession, but celebration. Not about winning, but about ensuring that happiness prevails, even at personal cost.
The wedding reception was winding down, and Mason found himself wandering the quiet streets of downtown Nashville. His heart still throbbed with a mixture of sorrow and acceptance. The city lights reflected off wet pavement, echoing the emotions swirling inside him. Heartbreak, longing, and the tentative stirrings of hope for something new. Mason sat on a low sidewalk wall, guitar case leaning against the wall beside him, and allowed himself to simply breathe, to process the day. He felt the ache of lost love keenly, the reality that Emily and Caleb were truly together, their happiness secured without him. Mason closed his eyes, strumming a few soft chords on his guitar, letting the music carry his feelings, each note a cathartic release. The night air was cool, carrying with it the distant sounds of the city, the hum of traffic, laughter from nearby cafes, and the faint strains of a piano drifting from an open window. As he played, a young woman appeared, looking slightly lost and hesitant. She approached him, her eyes scanning the streets for guidance. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Can you tell me how to get to Broadway Street?" Mason looked up, meeting her gaze, and a small smile appeared on his lips. "Sure," he replied, pointing down the street. "It's just a few blocks that way. You'll see the signs." She smiled back, a mixture of relief and gratitude in her expression. "Thank you. I'm new in town and everything feels so overwhelming." Mason nodded knowingly. "I get it. Nashville can be a lot at first. But it's a beautiful place once you find your rhythm." There was an ease in their exchange, a lightness that Mason hadn't felt in weeks, a spark of connection that suggested the possibility of new beginnings. They walked together toward Broadway, chatting about the city, music, and their favorite spots to explore. Mason laughed softly at her anecdotes, the sound mingling with the distant city music, and felt a warmth he hadn't anticipated. There was no pressure, no past regrets intruding, just a simple, honest connection forming organically under the moonlit streets of Nashville. As they paused at a street corner, Mason gestured toward a small cafe bathed in soft light. "Do you want to grab a coffee? My treat," he asked. She smiled, nodding. "I'd like that." They entered the cafe, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and pastries wrapping around them like a comforting embrace. Their conversation flowed easily, filled with laughter, curiosity, and mutual interest. Mason felt the knot of heartbreak in his chest loosen slightly, replaced with cautious hope. Afterwards, they stepped outside into the cool night air, walking along the quiet streets. Mason felt lighter, as if the weight of his past heartache was beginning to lift. The woman's laughter rang out, pure and unself-conscious, and he realized that life still held moments of joy, connection, and potential, even after profound disappointment. The city around them seemed to shimmer in a new light, one of possibility and fresh beginnings. Mason glanced up at the moon, its silver glow reflecting in his eyes. He thought of Emily and Caleb, and the sacrifices he had made to ensure their happiness. His heart still ached, yes, but he also felt a deep sense of peace. He had done the right thing, acted with integrity, and now the universe seemed to offer him a second chance, an opportunity to start anew without the shadow of unrequited love. The young woman turned to him, smiling warmly. "I'm glad I ran into you," she said softly. Mason returned her smile, the faint ache of the day giving way to a spark of excitement. "Me too," he replied. Sometimes the unexpected paths lead to the best discoveries. They walked continued under the moonlight, laughter and conversation flowing easily between them, the quiet streets of Nashville serving as the backdrop for a new chapter in Mason's life. As they disappeared into the glowing city night, Mason felt the first stirrings of hope that he hadn't allowed himself in months. Heartbreak, he realized, was not the end. It was a beginning. And tonight, under the stars, he took the first steps toward discovering what that beginning could hold.
The streets of Nashville were quiet now, bathed in the soft glow of street lamps and the occasional neon sign flickering from a nearby bar. Mason walked alongside the young woman he had met by chance that evening, their laughter drifting into the cool night air.
There was a comfortable rhythm to their steps, an ease that contrasted sharply with the whirlwind of emotions Mason had endured over the past months. His heartbreak, while still lingering, had begun to fade into a quiet acceptance, replaced with a cautious hope for the future. Mason glanced to the young woman, her eyes sparkling in the lamplight, and felt a strange, almost surreal sense of normalcy. "So," he said with a grin, "what brings you to this city full of music, neon lights, and endless honky-tonks?" She chuckled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Honestly, I have no idea. I just needed a change, a fresh start, and apparently I needed to get lost to find it," she teased, nudging him gently. Mason laughed, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease. Unbeknownst to them, two familiar faces observed from across the street: Tony and Vance, minor antagonists who had appeared briefly in Mason's story, causing small ripples of chaos here and there. Tony, tall and wiry with a permanent smirk plastered across his face, nudged Vance, who was shorter but equally shifty-eyed. "Hey, look," Tony whispered, nodding toward Mason. "He's okay. I mean, really okay." Vance squinted, his expression skeptical. "Wait, are you saying he's actually happy?" Tony nodded emphatically. "Yeah, I mean, look at him. He's walking around like he owns the night, laughing, smiling, with someone new. That's progress, my friend. That's character development, if I ever saw it." Vance raised an eyebrow, a grin tugging at his lips. "And we're just standing here watching him? Isn't that kind of weird?" Tony laughed softly, breaking the fourth wall as if aware of the audience watching. "Nah, Vance, this is important. You gotta know the hero gets his moment. Mason's been through enough, and we're here to tell everyone he'll be okay. Really, he'll be just fine." Vance smirked, shaking his head in amusement. "You think he knows how lucky he is?" Tony shrugged. "Doesn't matter. The audience does, and that's what counts." Meanwhile, Mason and the young woman had wandered into a quiet park, where the faint sounds of a street musician strumming a guitar filled the air. Mason leaned against the bench, glancing up at the stars. "It's funny," he said softly, almost to himself, "how life just goes on. You think something's over, something's lost, and then it's like the universe gives you another chance." The young woman smiled warmly. "Maybe that's just how Nashville works," she teased. "Music, love, lost rings, and new beginnings." Mason laughed, the sound easy, light, and unburdened for the first time in months. From across the street, Tony and Vance continued their commentary, providing an unusual yet amusing narration of the scene. "See that? That's the thing about heroes. They stumble, they fall, they almost ruin everything, and then, somehow, they find someone new, someone who makes it all worth it." Vance nodded thoughtfully, pretending to take notes. "We could write a book about this. Mason, from Heartbreak to Moonlight Strolls. Catchy title, huh?" Tony snorted. "Perfect. And we'd make sure everyone watching knows this is a happy ending. No doubts." Back in the park, Mason paused, turning to look at the young woman. "I never thought I'd feel like this again," he admitted quietly. "After everything, Emmeline, Caleb, it all felt like it would last forever in my head, but then vanish in reality. And now, this, just being here, talking, laughing, it feels right." She reached out, taking his hand in hers. "Maybe life isn't about clinging to what we can't have. Maybe it's about noticing what's right in front of us. And sometimes, that's better than anything we imagined." Mason's chest tightened, not with pain, but with the sweet relief of connection, of opportunity, of hope. As they strolled beneath the moonlight, the city's faint hum of activity around them, Mason's heart felt lighter. He realized that the ending he had envisioned for himself, full of longing, regret, and lost love, was not the only possibility. Life had given him a second chance, and this time he would embrace it without hesitation. Meanwhile, Tony and Vance, ever the playful observers, glanced at each other with mock seriousness. "Well," Tony said, gesturing broadly at Mason and his new companion, "looks like he's officially moved on, and we're here to tell you, the audience, it's okay. Mason's life isn't over. In fact, it's just beginning." Vance chuckled. "And we'll be sure to run if the cops show up. You know, dramatic effect and all that."
Just as if on cue, a distant police siren wailed through the streets, its sound echoing faintly in the night air. Tony and Vance exchanged a glance, grinning. "Time to disappear," Tony whispered. They dashed away down a nearby alley, laughing as if escaping some imaginary peril, leaving Mason and the young woman to their quiet, unfolding story. Mason glanced after them, shaking his head with a smile. "Those two are something else," he murmured. The young woman laughed softly, leaning against his shoulder. "They definitely are, but look at us. No chaos, just us, and this city, and tonight. Perfect." Mason nodded, feeling a rare, untroubled contentment. "Perfect," he echoed, strumming a few gentle chords on his guitar that had been slung across his back. The night stretched on, a soft symphony of city sounds, distant music, and laughter enveloping them. Mason walked beside the young woman, their steps in harmony, their voices blending in quiet conversation. Every so often, he glanced up at the stars, grateful for the twists of fate, the challenges overcome, and the moments of clarity that had led him here. As they reached the bridge overlooking the river, Mason stopped and looked down at the shimmering water. "You know," he said thoughtfully, almost to himself, "how life just goes on. You think something's over, something's lost, and then it's like the universe gives you another chance." The young woman smiled warmly. "Maybe that's just how Nashville works," she teased. "Music, love, lost rings, and new beginnings." Mason laughed, the sound easy, light, and unburdened for the first time in months. From across the street, Tony and Vance continued their commentary, providing an unusual yet amusing narration of the scene. "See that? That's the thing about heroes. They stumble, they fall, they almost ruin everything, and then, somehow, they find someone new, someone who makes it all worth it." Vance nodded thoughtfully, pretending to take notes. "We could write a book about this. Mason from Heartbreak to Moonlight Strolls. Catchy title, huh?" Tony snorted. "Perfect. And we'd make sure everyone watching knows this is a happy ending. No doubts." Back in the park, Mason paused, turning to look at the young woman. "I never thought I'd feel like this again," he admitted quietly. "After everything, Emily, Caleb, it all felt like it would last forever in my head, but then vanish in reality. And now, this, just being here, talking, laughing, it feels right." She reached out, taking his hand in hers. "Maybe life isn't about clinging to what we can't have. Maybe it's about noticing what's right in front of us. And sometimes, that's better than anything we imagined." Mason's chest tightened, not with pain, but with the sweet relief of connection, of opportunity, of hope. As they strolled beneath the moonlight, the city's faint hum of activity around them, Mason's heart felt lighter. He realized that the ending he had envisioned for himself, full of longing, regret, and lost love, was not the only possibility. Life had given him a second chance, and this time he would embrace it without hesitation. Meanwhile, Tony and Vance, ever the playful observers, glanced at each other with mock seriousness. "Well," Tony said, gesturing broadly at Mason and his new companion, "looks like he's officially moved on. And we're here to tell you, the audience, it's okay. Mason's life isn't over. In fact, it's just beginning." Vance chuckled. "And we'll be sure to run if the cops show up, dramatic effect and all that." Just as if on cue, a distant police siren wailed through the streets, its sound echoing faintly in the night air. Tony and Vance exchanged a glance, grinning. "Time to disappear," Tony whispered. They dashed away down a nearby alley, laughing as if escaping some imaginary peril, leaving Mason and the young woman to their quiet, unfolding story. Mason glanced after them, shaking his head with a smile. "Those two are something else," he murmured. The young woman laughed softly, leaning against his shoulder. "They definitely are. But look at us. No chaos, just us, and this city, and tonight. Perfect." Mason nodded, feeling a rare, untroubled contentment. "Perfect," he echoed, strumming a few gentle chords on his guitar that had been slung across his back. The night stretched on, a soft symphony of city sounds, distant music, and laughter enveloping them. Mason walked beside the young woman, their steps in harmony, their voices blending in quiet conversation. Every so often, he glanced up at the stars, grateful for the twists of fate, the challenges overcome, and the moments of clarity that had led him here. As they reached the bridge overlooking the river, Mason stopped and looked down at the shimmering water. "You know," he said thoughtfully, almost to himself, "sometimes I think life is like this river. Fast, unpredictable, sometimes carrying things we can't hold on to.
But it also brings new beginnings, new faces, new chances, new stories." The young woman smiled, squeezing his hand gently. "Then let's make the most of it," she said. Mason returned her smile, a genuine, unburdened expression that radiated hope and possibility. From their vantage point, the city lights reflected like 1,000 tiny stars on the water below. And Mason realized that though one chapter of his life had closed, the story of lost love, heartbreak, and sacrifice, another was just beginning. With laughter, companionship, and music as constant companions, he felt ready to embrace whatever came next. In the distance, the faint echo of Tony and Vance's earlier commentary lingered, almost like a whimsical reminder. Sometimes, the story's heroes don't need saving. They just need to keep walking, to keep living, and to notice the unexpected joys life places in their path. Mason had learned that lesson well, and as the city of Nashville stretched out around him, he felt, for the first time in months, that life truly went on, and so would he. The camera, if it were there, might have panned out slowly, Mason and the young woman walking hand in hand beneath the glowing city lights, the faint strum of his guitar blending with the distant music of the night, and two mischievous figures, Tony and Vance, vanishing into the distance, leaving the audience with a sense of closure, hope, and continuity. Life, messy and unpredictable as it was, continued, and so did Mason's story.